we can't claim to love our neighbor, we can't claim to love our communities if we tolerate injustice. Love without justice is deficient.
Every year, the IRC honors an individual who shapes history with their moral clarity and practical commitment. I'm so proud to introduce Bryan Stevenson, lawyer, law professor, social justice activist, and the founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative. He's worked tirelessly throughout his career to help improve the criminal justice system in the United States. But his commitments go wider and deeper, as we're all about to find out. Bryan, it's an incredible honor for us to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Really, thanks. I want to start at the beginning of your extraordinary book, Just Mercy. You've got this amazing quote. You say, "Love is the motive, justice is the instrument." Tell us how you came to see the justice system and reform of the justice system as the right way for you to make social change.
Well, I do think we can't claim to love our neighbor, we can't claim to love our communities if we tolerate injustice. Love without justice is deficient. And I don't think we can achieve justice if we don't infuse ourselves with compassion and concern, and yes, even love for the people around us. And when I was born, the prison population in the United States was under 250,000. And during my childhood and as I grew older, that changed. And we've gone now from about 300,000 people in our jails and prisons to 2.3 million. And so in this era, we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world. It's shaping the lives of the poor and people of color. 1 in 3 black male babies was projected to go to jail or prison at the beginning of this century. And so for me, responding to this carceral state that we have created and focusing on inequality and injustice has become a priority. If I care about the people that I live with, if I care about my family and my community, then that seems to be, has to be a priority.
And did that come from your mother, your parents, your grandparents? Where did that, from the conditions, from school?
I mean, I'm a product of the civil rights movement. I grew up in a community where black children couldn't go to the public schools. And the people who really made the civil rights revolution succeed had an orientation toward love. Dr. King and Rosa Parks and so many of those folks were rooted in this kind of belief that to overcome, you have to actually embrace, you have to push against hate, you have to reject violence, you have to reject these things. And I stand on the shoulders of people who did so much more with so much less. I mean, the people who came before me would put on their Sunday best, they'd go places to protest for equality, and they knew they'd get bloodied and battered and beaten for that protest, and yet they went anyway. That was a kind of conviction, a kind of commitment. And yes, I took that to heart, and it does sustain me in the work that I do.
At IRC, we talk a lot about how to achieve change, theories of change. Tell us, what's your theory of change at the Equal Justice Initiative?
Well, at the core, I believe that each person is more than the worst thing they've ever done. I think when we reduce people to their worst act, we open the doors to inequality and injustice. And for me, if you tell a lie, you're not just a liar. If you take something, you're not just a thief. Even if you kill someone, you're not just a killer. And that means we have to look at the other things you are. And so the beginning of my work is actually lifting up this view of humanity, this view of basic human dignity that goes beyond the acts that are created by trauma, neglect, and mental illness. Then comes a broader vision of justice. I think the opposite of poverty isn't wealth. I believe that the opposite of poverty is justice. And to do justice means we actually have to challenge the structures and systems that have created inequality and injustice. I think creating rights is critical because there will be moments when the political environment shifts back and forth. We have to be committed to the rule of law to protect the rights of every human being so that even when people are disfavored, they have basic rights that can't be abridged.
Mm-hmm. So 2020 was not just the year of COVID, it was also the year of the murder of George Floyd and the emergence of a global movement under the banner of Black Lives Matter. Can you talk a bit about the significance of the last year for the struggle for racial justice, both here and maybe the lessons or the implications globally?
Yeah, I think in the United States we've been silent about our history of racial inequality for most of our history. We haven't talked about the genocide of indigenous people that occurred when Europeans came to this continent and the way that those populations were slaughtered by famine and war and disease. We haven't acknowledged that the great evil of American slavery was this narrative that we created that black people aren't as good as white people, that black people are less human, less evolved, less capable, less deserving. And that has a legacy. We didn't say anything about the century of terror and violence that resulted in thousands of black people being pulled from their homes and beaten and burned and drowned and lynched. We created an architecture of law in this country that insisted on racial hierarchy, and we haven't really acknowledged all of the harms. And so what I think we saw in 2020 is that if we continue to be silent about this history of racial inequality, we will not make the progress we need to make. And I think the global implications of that are whenever you have profound human rights violations, it's not enough to try to restrict those violations. You have to acknowledge the consequences, that you have to talk about the harm. And that's why I've been seeing in this last year the urgency of a new era of truth and justice. And that needs to happen in America, it needs to happen in Africa, it needs to happen in the Mideast, it needs to happen in Europe, it needs to happen all over the world where people have been disfavored and marginalized and victimized. And I think that truth and justice, truth and reconciliation, truth and reparation, truth and restoration, these things are sequential. You can't skip the truth telling. You got to tell the truth to get to all of those beautiful R words. I come from a faith tradition where you can't come to our church and say you want salvation and heaven and all that good stuff. The preachers will tell you that you first have to confess, you have to repent, you have to be willing to tell the truth about the challenges, and that's how we get to redemption. And I think that's the moment we're in, and I think that the George Floyd brutal murder just kind of reminded people or inspired people to recognize that we can no longer tolerate silence.
Mm-hmm. You've got this beautiful and important quote on your website for this memorial that you've built in Montgomery, Alabama, to all those black victims of lynching in the United States. And you say, it's a sacred place for truth-telling, just what you were saying now, and reflection about racial terrorism and its legacy. And I think it would be great just to hear you talk a bit about that truth-telling, and maybe in a more practical way, because you've got examples all around the country of memorials, mini memorials that you've created at the sites of those 1,000+ lynchings, and there are stories associated with them that I think could really inspire a global audience that we've got here today.
Sure. Well, yes, I want to invite everybody to come to Montgomery, Alabama, to spend time in our sites when that's possible. We do believe that you have to kind of memorialize, that you have to lift up the truth of this history, and we do that in multiple ways. I mean, you've seen that in places like Berlin, where there are memorials trying to reckon with the history of the Holocaust, and there are consequences to that. There are no Adolf Hitler statues in Germany. There's this kind of growing awareness that you have to recover. And that's what we're trying to do in this country. And yes, we do invite people to go to lynching sites in America and to dig soil and to put soil in jars that honor the names. These were people who were largely ignored. Their names were never acknowledged. And what's powerful is that when you take a step, when you go someplace where there has been horrific violence, and you do something reflective, you can change things. And we have this exhibit in our museum of these jars of soil with the names of lynching victims. And there was an older black woman who did one of these a couple of years ago. And she told me that when she got to her site, she got really nervous because it was in a remote location on a dirt road. And she was a little afraid, but she decided to do it. She got to the site, she got her jar out. We give each person a memo that talks about the incident. And we give them an implement to dig the soil. And as she found the site, a pickup truck drove by, and there was a big white guy in this truck. And he stared at her. And she got very anxious. And then the truck slowed down, he stopped, he turned around, and he drove back by again, and he stared some more. And she said she got really alarmed. And then this man parked his truck, got out and started walking toward her. She said she was terrified. He came up to her, and she was going to explain to him she was just getting dirt for her garden. And the man, sure enough, said, "What are you doing?" And she told me later, she said, "Mr. Stevenson, when he asked me that, she said, something got a hold of me. And I told that man, I'm digging soil because this is where a black man was lynched, and I'm going to honor his life today." She started digging real fast, and the man just stood there. And then the man said, "Does that paper talk about the lynching?" And she said, "Yes." And then he said, "Can I read it?" And she gave this man the paper while she started digging. He kept reading. And he finished, and then he shocked her. He put the paper down, and he looked at her, and he said, "Excuse me, but would it be all right if I helped you?" And she said this man got on his knees and she offered him the implement. He said, no, 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 you keep that. And then he started throwing his hands into the soil and putting it in the jar. He kept throwing his hands into the soil with such conviction that it moved her. And she said a tear started running down her face. And the man stopped and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm upsetting you. And she said, no, 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 you're blessing me. And the man kept digging with his hands, and she kept digging with the implement, and they were getting toward the top of the jar. And she noticed that the man was slowing down. And she turned to him, and she put her hand on his shoulder, and she said, are you all right? And she saw a tear running down his face. And he said, no, ma'am, I'm not all right. He said, I'm just so worried that it might have been my grandfather who participated in this lynching. And she said they both sat on this roadside weeping. And they finished the soil collection, and the man said, I want to take a picture of you holding the jar. And she said, well, I want to take a picture of you holding the jar. And they took pictures of one another. And she said, I'm going back to Montgomery to put this in the museum. And the man said, can I come with you? And they came back together, and I watched this beautiful thing happen. And the truth is that beautiful things like that don't always happen when we tell the truth. But until we tell the truth, we deny ourselves the beauty that is justice. And that's why this is an era, this is a time for truth-telling, for lifting up the humanity and dignity of every human being. And that's why I believe in the work of the IRC, because it's ultimately about protecting each person's humanity and dignity and not letting conflict and strife marginalize and exclude those who would otherwise be victimized and abandoned.
I mean, those are beautiful and inspiring words. I could spend the day talking to you, and I think many of our audience would actually love to listen to you for the rest of the day. But the show must go on. You've got many things still to do. I really profoundly want to thank you for honoring us by accepting this year's Freedom Award. We want to walk with you, and we are so proud that you are walking with us. So thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Really, thank you.